Hello, today is June 7th, 2015, and this is Overgrowth Weekly 97 with questions and answers session number 13. My name is Lukas.
I'm Anton Real.
I'm David Rosen.
I'm Aubrey, sir.
And yeah, let's just jump straight into it, shall we? So first off, I have questions that are not asked by the community that I think are good to get answered. State of the game, like, could David and Aubrey just go through like where's the game at right now in terms of like when can we expect to see the next alpha and stuff like that, and what's going on right now?
So a while ago we were considering the Unreal Engine, and that was probably a month or a bit more, and then eventually decided against switching to that. That took up a little bit of time. But now we have more of a plan. We want to start by focusing on the arena and making it into more of a complete game in itself. So when people play it now, they'll feel like they're playing through a whole game. People won't be like, oh, this is a tech demo or not finished. We're working on that right now. I also, after messing with Unreal a bit, I want to update the graphics a little bit. Be more modern. I've been working on that as well. And I'm working on expanding the team. I'm going to be talking to a programmer tomorrow who worked on natural selection and might join Overgrowth. I'm going to keep trying to expand as much as we can afford based on pre-orders, just to try and keep things moving.
Yeah,
Sounds pretty good.
You know, I was really against kind of growing the team for a long time, but I think that we've gotten to a point where it makes a lot of sense, and we are actually starting to look for like full-time employees, full-fire employees for the first time ever. So I think that's pretty exciting. I think obviously code is probably the first thing we're going to look at. I don't know if we would ever hire a full-time artist. There's a lot of really skilled contract artists that live in a lot cheaper places than San Francisco. So they're really good at doing work off-site. So that's my thought on hiring artists. But that's definitely a possibility too, I think.
Cool. So why were you against hiring more people before?
Well, for a long time, I thought we could do the game ourselves at a level that we would be happy with. And I think we did a pretty good job, but you know, as time has passed, our expectations of what we should deliver have also changed. And also it's kind of like a lot of the work that I used to be happy doing, like the more tedious stuff, I just don't really want to deal with anymore. I'd rather focus on more exciting work. So I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell for me.
All right. We have a question from the chat. Girth asks, what graphics features will be added then?
Well, one thing I was starting with is global illumination and HDR. So we've had HDR rendering for a while, but we haven't actually done anything with overbright pixels. So I recently just made it bloom outwards in a nice way.
Cool.
And added a post shader where you can control the white and black balance, so you can choose where exactly you want that to be. And global illumination is pretty critical to make any kind of indoor or partially indoor area look good. And that's been an issue for a while. Like, we had baked ambient occlusion, but that's just not quite as good as I would like it to be. Now I'm working on sort of a light probe tetrahedral mesh approach, kind of like they used in Killzone Shadowfall towards the end of their development.
Nice. Cool. Where is that everything you want to do, or is there anything else you want to add before you think you're done with it? The graphics update.
Those are... Well, I always still have to keep a balance between graphics and working on the rest of the game. There's a ton of graphics that I would like to add. Like, it'd be fun. Well, there's a lot of ones that have been commonly requested, like soft body fracture for the characters when they get hit by swords. I guess the next priority would actually be more dynamic lights, so you could have campfires and torches and things like that. There'd be global illumination with the HDR bloom, and then more dynamic lighting, and then there's random fun effects like fire and water and slashing people up.
Yeah.
Well, it seems
That-
like the lighting thing sort of helps with the campaign objectives, since that was a real part of Lugaru before, right? So
Yeah, the lighting and GI are a priority because they actually affect level design. Like, you can't really have a lot of level designs without those, because you just can't control how things look and make the spaces readable. Like, without
Right.
proper GI, an indoor environment just looks flat, and it's hard to tell where the platforms are.
right.
So talking about Lugaru, we talked about before a few weeks ago or months ago, that Akasi was working on a port of the Lugaru campaign.
Yeah. I think most of the frameworks for those levels are done. Like, all the objects and characters and things are in the right place. The thing that's not done yet is Lugaru relied on a few features that Overgrowth doesn't have yet. Like, it had staff fighting. We don't have staves yet. And a couple other things, like campfires. So I have to make sure that those are all in before that can be really done.
Do you have an idea of when you think that's going to be in the alpha? Because that's something that's going to be added to the actual game, right? To Overgrowth.
Yeah. I think that should be within... Well, it's always hard to say dates.
Yeah.
I'd say not before a month.
Okay, I think that's pretty. That gives some sort of idea anyway.
Right.
All right, cool. So on to community questions. We have a question from Dadechu, who asks, wider variety of cats?
More cats. I mean, who doesn't want more cats? Like, at the end of the day. Before I work on more character models, I don't know. Like, there's some features I think it would be cool. But I also think that what we have now is probably good enough. So, but yeah, if the number of cats becomes the weak link in the game, I think that'll definitely get worked on. So, but maybe not anytime soon.
We've definitely thought about it. It's not priority one, but it would be cool. With cats and dogs, there are, and rabbits even, there's a very wide variety in real life. Especially in their like face and head
Yeah,
and fur lengths.
I think if I was going to add more character variation, it would be with the dogs, because like different dogs just look way more different than different cats.
Have you considered using morph targets for making variation in that?
I could. I think that would be my first approach. There'd be two basic broad approaches: use the existing models and use morph targets, which I did with the wolf and was able to get away with an awful lot. Or just start totally new characters. I think if I went with the new character approach, then I would just throw out the old stuff. But going that way would be like a way bigger commitment. So I don't know if that's going to happen. Adapting the old stuff, that's not that hard. And like different cats, it might just be like more fur on the face or something. It's a relatively simple thing to mod. So it's not really like, wouldn't even require sculpting a new character necessarily.
All right, nice. We have a question from Manly Potato, who asks, when will you consider, or what will you add to consider the game complete, or at least at beta stage? what plans would you have for the game at the beta point? I think this is something that we kind of went through kind of at the beginning of these Q&As, but that was a while ago, so maybe we should get an update on that.
Well, right now, like I mentioned earlier, we're focusing on the arena. So if we get the arena to be like a fun game in itself, then that would be a pretty big milestone.
I don't think there's any reason why the arena mode shouldn't be a fully satisfying game with, unlockable content, like content progression and narrative. I think all of that stuff could easily fit into that game mode if we wanted to do that. So I don't know if that's on the beta, would be a beta milestone, but it's a possibility. So
yeah, is that like something that you have in mind? Like we want to hit beta, and that means a certain type of thing.
So there's always kind of an internal debate that we're thinking about, like how far do we want to take things? Because there's only so much of our remaining lives that we can kind of afford to put into this game. Because it's already been like 8 years or something.
yeah,
They don't.
Getting more help is going to change what we can do, and we just don't know what that's going to look like yet.
Cool, exciting. So Manly Potato also asks, and will we ever see forest settings?
I think we probably will.
Pretty sure we could do that right now. A lot of people would complain, but on my computer, I'm pretty sure I could make a forest. I haven't tried recently. I had tried in the first few years of development, I tried making forests a few times, and with hardware upgrades and optimizations, got closer and closer to something resembling an actual forest each time. And with the most recent passive optimizations, I'm pretty sure we could do it.
There's a couple main issues for forests. So there's a lot of overdraw, just because there's a lot of layers of things. And with the forward rendering, that can be an issue. So you need to add like a Z pre-pass, which does like a really cheap depth-only render, or change how the rendering is done. And we also need level of detail, so as things get farther away, they get cheaper to render. Because those are the two main issues. There's just a lot of overdraw, and there's just a very large number of objects. So we'd have to address those two things. But things get simpler in the arena because you just can't move the camera around as much because you're inside a fairly restricted area. So it's a lot easier to make any different environment we want. So we'll probably start environments with that and then see what else needs to be done.
Yeah, the reality is that the more complicated the scene, the fewer people are going to be able to run it. And just because I can run it on my work PC doesn't mean that other people will be happy with it. So the arena is simple enough that pretty much anybody should be able to run it. I mean, if they can't run the arena, then their computer is probably ancient.
Yeah. Do you have some sort of target minimum spec that you test against or something like that to make sure the game lives up to performance requirements?
More or less. Like I keep 4 different computers that I use for development and testing that range in age. There's one of them that I think I've retired, which was a 2005 MacBook Pro. I think that's probably not a reasonable target anymore. But there's the Steambox thing we got from Steam Dev Days, and I have the ATI computer that I started development on back in 2008, and I have a new gaming PC at home with NVIDIA GTX 970. So we're testing on NVIDIA, ATI, Intel, and a range of speeds.
Yeah,
I want it to run reasonably on all of them.
I typically demo the game on the Intel i7 I think it is integrated chipset, in the Surface, the Microsoft Surface, and it runs like a lot of the stuff runs just fine. So it's really nice when it runs on that, as far as I'm concerned. It
Cool.
also totally blows people's minds. They're like, it's running on this. So I think that's a good indicator that the game is pretty efficient.
But I kind of
Yeah.
want it to run better on high-end hardware also. I mean, like, be able to use all that resource. Because, like, on my gaming PC at home, it runs at like 1,000 frames per second. So it'd be nicer to be able to ramp up the graphics and bring it down to like 120 or something. But I also want to make sure it runs fast on the low end, if people want.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit elusive as well with that performance, because some levels run really, really well, and then if you give the game to a modder who makes his own level, then suddenly the game goes down to 10 frames per second on like an average computer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to do that as well. Like as soon as you start adding a lot of enemies or a lot of objects, the performance goes down a lot.
Yeah, I want to work on that. Like, one issue is triangle density with the physics. I think we've talked about it before a little bit. Like, there's the chessboard issue. Like, if you make a chessboard that has all these tiny pieces on it, and then you stand on it, you're colliding with everything there, and it runs really slow. When the whole thing could have just been like a bounding box. So I want some way for that to automatically simplify a bit for modders.
We have a question from Steel Raven in the chat, who asks, do you use any speed up techniques for the collision right now? I'm thinking like bounding box hierarchies.
Yeah. Yeah, the collision uses... It would go super slow if we were just brute forcing the collision. So it uses... Yeah, bounding volume hierarchies, basically, like you mentioned.
Alright, nice.
Okay.
Do you want to take the next question, Anton?
Sure. This is a question from Thomason 10005 or 1005. I don't know how to say that. The detailed texture system which OG uses is cool, but creates pretty flat surfaces at the moment. Other game features parallax mapping, or also known as offset mapping or displacement mapping, or tessellation, which both use a depth texture in the end. Now, is this something you would consider putting into the game, or would it mean too much work to make these depth maps?
I think there's some ways to automatically create depth maps from normal maps. Usually it's not quite as high quality as if they're authored by hand. But that might be one way to do it. And in a lot of cases, the depth maps can be a lot simpler than you might think. Like if you have a brick building, a lot of games ship with basically it's just white on the brick and black in the mortar, and they use that for their parallax.
There's a lot of like tiling texture materials have become kind of not free, but very easily achievable now. The tools are totally different. So like Substance Designer allows you to really pretty simply make PBR style materials with depth information. And that's really cool. But again, it would be one of those situations where like if I wanted to author the content, I would want to redo it all. And that's a pretty big bridge to cross.
If we're adding a big feature like that, we don't want it to be inconsistent. It's like one rock over here has really nice displacement map detail, and then this other rock is kind of flat. So kind of have to do like all or nothing with changes like that.
Yeah, so we have like the whole the newest next gen stuff is all PBR based. All the tools are really, really good. Would be way faster to redo everything than it would be to retrofit everything. So like an automated solution like David mentioned is possible, but to actually go and add depth information to all of the existing materials would be pointless, basically.
We'd also want to have a sort of finished campaign or single player first, so just we know what assets are actually being used, because we don't want to like go and retrofit assets that aren't actually going to make it into the game.
Right. So in some ways, it's almost like you would almost approach it kind of like an update, visual update at some point to go back and do this.
Yeah.
If you do it at all.
And tessellation is kind of an interesting issue. I have some opinions about that.
Are you gonna share?
Well, I don't like grid-based tessellation because most of the shapes you want just don't, the features don't match up to a grid. Like that works for any kind of like blobby surface. Like if you're making a mud surface and you want to tessellate that, then that's perfect. But if you're making a brick wall and you want to tessellate that, the grid's vertices are not going to line up with the actual edges that you're trying to represent. I think it'd be interesting to try out some kind of different approach.
Maybe some kind of off-the-grid style technology.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually what I was thinking while you were saying that. So
It'd be interesting to generalize that to work on other things besides terrain, and also have more of a smooth transition between the different levels of detail.
right.
Yeah.
That's something that is often very obvious, is that transition between level of detail, and especially if you automate it, a lot of it, then something like that could be a useful way to transition.
Yeah, I think a lot of graphics programmers have kind of abandoned the idea of vertex morphing in favor of just a pop between them or a stipple fade, which is like every other pixel transitions from one to the next. But I think vertex morphing still has some potential. So it'd be fun to experiment with that.
Right.
But then we're getting more into like graphics R&D and farther away from the game, which I keep wanting, kind of being tempted to do.
Right.
But I think having more programmers would make that more feasible.
Makes sense.
Why I'm starting with that.
But you implemented vertex morphing level of detail for Overgrowth, though, right?
Yeah. The hard part is when you want, like for terrain, you would want different levels of detail for different parts of the terrain, and you need them to still attach properly. Or if you have a building, you might want like the bricks up close to have the higher LOD and the bricks farther away to have lower LOD without a visual seam between them. So it's not too hard to do smooth LOD for characters or any other like medium-sized object. But any large object that you want to divide into pieces gets a little more complicated.
For sure. Okay,
Yep.
so
I saw a couple follow-up questions in the chat regarding the bounding blocks hierarchies. Girth, there's two that I saw that I thought could be an interesting continuation. Girth asked, I saw some code for plane colliders, so did you already experiment with that? And the second one was Steel Raven 7 asked, do you do bounding blocks hierarchies with objects only or triangles as well?
Bounding box hierarchies are with... Well, it's a little complicated. It does objects only for dynamic objects, but for static meshes, like in how the whole world, like all the terrain and all the other static meshes are combined into one triangle mesh, which is then subdivided into its own hierarchy. We have the one static triangle hierarchy, and then we have the dynamic object hierarchy too.
So they kind of interact with each other, or they interact, or they're kind of separate from each other?
Well, when you have an object, like if you want to check for collision between a dynamic object and the static world, then first you would check like which triangle bounding boxes the object collides with, and then you would start going deeper. In collision detection, they usually call that broad phase versus narrow phase. Like broad phase is getting a general idea of like what things might collide, and then narrow phase is when you get down to like what triangle is intersecting what other triangle and by how much, and how do you fix it.
Makes sense. So
I guess this is kind of a complicated question. But in GDC, it had a whole physics for game developers track this year and last year. So anyone who's interested in that should check those out.
good
Awesome.
to know.
And we have a question from Sehiro, who has a question about gameplay. He writes, in the case the player is approaching an enemy at full speed but releases the W key and only then presses the left mouse button, how does the game decide which attack will be performed between a straight punch and a roundhouse kick? Or a frontal kick, I would assume. As far as I've tested, the game goes for the roundhouse most of the times. Shall I infer that the decision is not based on player input but on movement of the character? In this case, inertial movement?
I think it actually is based on the player input. So if you do it in slow motion, that would be a good way to test that out. So you can hold down W while running towards someone, then let it go, then click. But there's kind of a 2x2 matrix here, where there's attacks you do while you're moving, and there's attacks you do while you're very close or far away. It's like when you're far away, the character's moving attack is a roundhouse kick, and his stationary attack is the front push kick. And when he's really close, the moving attack is like a hook punch, and the stationary attack is the knee attack. So it's determined based on those two factors.
But it should be based on input and not actual movement then.
Yeah, I think it's based on input and not your current velocity. So you could be like running up to someone and then you let go and your character is still moving, and then you do a stationary attack just by clicking, even though you're still sliding.
Yeah. Did Girth get an answer to the plane collider question, or did that get lost?
Plane colliders. Well, they do a ton of plane collision. Like, plane collision is a subset of how you do most other collision. Like, if you do collision with a triangle or with a convex hull, it's really just a series of plane checks. I'm not sure exactly what that question means.
He posted some code into a paste bin where he's asking like the specifics of what he's referring to, I think.
But if I recall correctly, yeah, I saw some code for plane colliders. So you already experimented with that? Was his question?
Yes.
Yes, then. Yes is the answer.
I think this example might be related to the plane that's used when you slice someone with a sword or other sharp object, and then it makes a blood slash on them. And that's done by doing a collision check between the plane of the sword's movement and the mesh of the character, and putting a cut where they intersect.
Right.
Nice. Real nice. All right. So we had a question in the chat from RoDJ25, and he asks, "Is this topic accurate?" And then he sends a link, which I will send it to you in Skype.
Red.
And it's a page of rumors and confirmed stuff. He calls it. I'll see if I can get it up on the stream while you maybe answer it.
Well, I can go through some of these. One of them we already talked about was whether or not the Lugaro campaign will be ported over. So we kind of already talked about that. The one thing that he mentioned in here was that dialogue may still be having some issues. So are there issues that you know about, David, with the dialogue system?
Yeah, that's an issue with the dialogue editor, which is when the dialogue is really long, you just can't, there's no scroll bar or anything.
Oh, okay.
That's just a must-fix feature that I have to get to.
Got it. The next one was that he was asking about updated graphics, which we actually also already covered today. The next one that he says is confirmed was that we'll have a new menu, which is something that Aubrey was talking about. We were talking about how you were designing some of the user interface for the menu systems and things like that. So
I was happy with how that stuff was coming along, but I think it's probably going to get pushed back a little bit while we figure out our personnel stuff.
Okay.
The current menu is very alpha-y. Like, it doesn't... There's no, like, new game options, quit type thing. It's more like, which of these landscapes do you want to try out, and which of these alpha campaigns? So at some point, we have to switch to an actual finished, accessible menu.
Right. It feels to me, and I could be wrong about this, it does make the game feel more like a game when you have that in, but when but it feels to me like it's sort of one of the less important in terms of objectives, meaning it seems like it would be one of the easier things to implement that you can kind of do closer to the end of the development cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of prioritization issues, which are especially confusing when we're doing the early access thing. Because sometimes we don't want to put something off until right before it's done because people are playing it right now.
Right.
So it gets a little complicated. So right now, like, the arena is would be a good starting point for people to try, so that they can just kind of get into, like, what is the game. So I might want to move that more front and center relatively soon.
Okay.
Yeah, my thought process on the menu, I agree, it can be done anytime, and it's not like, doesn't seem like a very important feature compared to a lot of the other stuff. But I'm just not, like, I just don't think I'm smart enough to, like, imagine how all the different parts of the game are going to fit together without just kind of taking a linear approach to it. So it's like a personal shortcoming rather than any, like, logical reason to do it that way. Which is why I favored that kind of approach. But if we get other people with different capabilities on the project, then it's not clear how we should progress from there until we actually see what they can do.
Right. Makes sense.
Great. So yeah, that's probably the last answer, right?
You don't.
No.
I think we could finish this little rumors and confirmed stuff because I think.
Yeah. Okay. I thought that was the end. I'm sorry.
Oh no. So that's.
Oh no.
Oh no.
That's the end of what Rodeje said was the confirmed, and then some other rumors. Rodeje thinks that Gert said there will probably be more script functions, which David could probably verify that there will be more script things coming up.
There's always more script things.
So that's pretty much guaranteed, because as things develop, both you guys need access to it and modders need access to it. So I think that will be obvious. Another one that was, I know something you guys experimented with a long time ago, is voice acting. There's just a question about whether or not voice acting will ever happen.
I think that the final decision on that probably needs to wait until we see exactly what needs to be communicated in the game and how much of it there is.
Right.
Because the less there is, the easier it would be to do that.
Right. And we decided, I mean, not we, you, we, as we were talking about it before, you had said that it ended up potentially being a very expensive proposition, depending on how much voice acting there will need to be in the end. And even from some initial tests you did, finding a good voice actor is not always easy to do.
Yeah, to do it right, you need someone to handle casting, like a professional who's done that for many games, and then you need a director with the actors. And then ideally, if you're doing dialogue, you could do some kind of simultaneous recording, so you have to find like a time slot where both actors are available. It just gets complicated.
Right.
Even with all that stuff, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be good either. Like, you could end up like Destiny.
So there's that, and then the last one that's in this list was that the leg cannon will be nerfed, and I don't think that the leg cannon being nerfed is necessarily the correct answer, meaning that the attack itself will not become a weaker attack, but that there will be some other ways to deal with that if someone is trying to perform it on you, like aerial grabs and things like that. But if you want to talk about that, yeah,
the key thing is just to make sure that there's not one dominant strategy, that it's always best to do. We're definitely going to address that in one way or another.
With the AI, you kind of you've already dealt with it pretty well, where they tend to back away from you if you're in the air and they're on the ground, and they're paying attention to you. When you jump in the air, they move away so they don't get kicked. And I always felt like that was a pretty realistic and relatively easy solution to that. But where it may become a problem is when you give them the ability to perform that attack to you. You may need another counter as opposed to just moving out of the way.
Yeah, if an AI was doing a leg cannon on you, it'd probably want it to be a lot more telegraphed or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have to test it out a lot to figure out the best way to handle it.
Right. So it's more about how will you treat it rather than it will actually be nerfed, because the move itself is pretty appropriate to a giant rabbit, with a big jump landing on you with its powerful legs. I think it's pretty realistic-ish.
Yeah, I like how powerful it is and how cool it looks. I don't really want to mess that up.
Right. So, and certainly if you watch people playing the game, they love to stomp on people.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Okay, so I think that was it for this this topic.
Nice, real nice. All right, so that's 40 minutes of Overgrowth Weekly right there, in the can, folks.
Awesome.
There we go.
So thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and remember you can go to the forums. There is a link on ogweekly.com to it, where you can ask your questions, and we will try to answer them in the future. Also, of course, we have Twitters, all of us. Yeah, there's Twitters right there on the screen, and also at OG Weekly if you want to follow that to get informed when the stream starts. Also follow on Twitch. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and have an awesome rest of day, night, evening, morning.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.